I chose the question mark at the end of this title in order to pay tribute to the ongoing debate on the so-called Greco Arabic translation movement. In the past years, the classical narrative of a golden age of Islamic sciences in the 9th to 10th centuries, which saw mostly scientific texts from the Greek tradition being translated, has been challenged. The tendency now is to answer this question by, yes, there was certainly a translation movement, but there was much more. A very profound social transformation process, including much more than the Greek canonical sciences being incorporated and developed. From a much broader inflow of sources, namely from Iranian, Indian, Aramaic, sometimes even from Chinese texts, very often with a Syriac intermediary. Stretching over a much longer period of time, which at least took place in Mesopotamia as a whole, if we want not to include Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula. So what I want to do today is to show you with two examples how words and their histories challenge the view of a monolithic, clear-cut stage of the Greco-Arabic translation movement. Our first example comes from astronomy. After the Islamic conquests, and even before, the Greek astronomy and concepts of the cosmos were gradually inculturated by the Arabs. The Greek vision was outlined in Ptolemy's mathematical syntaxis, or Almagest, which entails a chapter on stars and constellations. The translation of this chapter in the Book of Fixed Stars by the Persian astronomer Ibn as-Ṣūfī in the 10th century even superseded its Greek predecessor, as it included not just the astronomical research achieved through observations over the past centuries, but even more so, as you can see here, it was enhanced by illustrations. The problem, however, of the translation was that the Greek constellations didn't match the traditional Arabian ones. Most of those fell fate to their incorporation into the Greek order of the firmament, such as the constellation Jazzar, the legendary wife of Sirius. The story of her unfortunate marriage gives a glimpse into the Bedouin lifestyle mirrored in Arabian celestial mythology. These legends were only transmitted orally, and therefore we can only rely on this contemporary reconstruction on how she might have looked like. Although she has not survived, because the whole Arabian constellation was replaced by a new Arabized version of Orion, at least her hand did. Betelgeuse is one of the red supergiants and the brightest star in Orion. Ptolemy's description as the bright reddish star on the right shoulder of Orion was translated by as-Ṣūfī as shoulder of Al-Jazzar, Mankib Al-Jazzar, but also as hand of Al-Jazzar. So you can see here that the right shoulder actually covers, the left shoulder covers her right hand. And this is exactly where the right shoulder of Orion is located. So this was very clever because on the one hand, he alleviated to understand where the location was placed. And on the other hand, he kept like the old flavor of this mythology. Fine, but how do we get from Yad al-Jazzar to Betelgeuse? This was due to a misspelling or misreading in the Arabic in the Arabic tradition. And as you can see here, it really only differs by this single dot. Yad al-Jazzar was misread as Bat al-Jazzar. which was then taken up and transliterated as such in the Latin edition of the Alphonsine tables, very important astronomical tables that were printed in Venice in 1492. And from then on, this erroneous form was taken for granted and reproduced, even in its latest approval by inclusion in the International Astronomical Union Catalogue of Star Names in 2016. So this is a nice example to show how an Arabic astronym survived the translation process, and it's not the only example, there are much more. Our second example is from mathematics, and I think it's a commonplace that the decimal system is of Arabic and ultimately Indian provenance. Khwārizmī, the famous mathematician of the 8th, 9th century, who is the name giver of the algorithm, is not just famous for his popularization of the methods of algebra, but with his book on calculation with Indian numerals, written in 820, he spread the idea of the decimal system and the notion and notation of zero throughout the Near East and the Western world. A milestone in the transmission to the West was the Liber Abaci, written in 1202 by the Italian mathematician Fibonacci, who introduced the term Cephirum as a translation of Arabic cipher. This became Zefiro in Italian, via Venetian Zevero, which was then contracted to zero, passed on to French zero, and then entered English, where it is attested for the first time in 1598 as arithmetical figure, which stands for naught. What is less known, that it was a Syriac bishop who for the first time mentions the Indian numerals outside of India. Severus Sebort, residing in different locations in Mesopotamia, in his letter to Basil of Cyprus, has a very important point to make: that the Greeks are not superior when it comes to science. Therefore, he lists several flaws in the theory of Ptolemy and tries to prove that also the Syrians, as heirs of the Babylonian, have a say in astronomical and other matters. Thus far, I have kept silent from speaking about the knowledge of the Indians, and these are not even Syrians, and about their careful discoveries in the field of astronomy and their method of calculation. I mean the 9 characters. So, and this is very interesting. Zero is really just a blank space in this context. So the translation and processing of knowledge from foreign cultures into a Semitic language had already a long tradition before the Arabic translation movement. Another very interesting point about the idea of zero is mentioned by Oswald Spengler, and though he's a very contested scholar, I think it's worth to look at what he has to say. This zero, which perhaps offers a glimpse of the Indian idea of the extended, of the spatiality of the world, so completely foreign to our spatial consciousness, was of course unknown to antiquity. It was introduced to us in a completely reinterpreted form, as a midpoint between +1 and -1, as a cut in the linear continuum of numbers. It was assimilated into the Western numerical world in an un-Indian sense of relationality, a shift that fundamentally altered its essence. So he was right in the sense that we employ zero today as the lowest point or degree only from the late 18th century on. In the pre-Islamic time, the word cipher had the meaning empty or emptiness, and evolved to mean zero, and it was used to translate shunya from Sanskrit. This, in turn, as an adjective, had a very, very long prehistory in Eastern philosophy. Already in the Upanishads and also in the Pali Canon, when the Buddha explained to his student Ananda the concept of non-self nature. This concept addresses the interconnectedness and contingency of every phenomenon, which is therefore empty of self. The self is only an illusion. I think we would need another 3-day Engelsberg seminar in order to really understand this concept of emptiness. But in Nietzsche, one might say that emptiness in the philosophical sense has nothing to do with nothingness, but rather the contrary. It's encompassing and pertaining to everything, a substantial part of reality, or as a Buddhist teacher even said, pregnant with possibilities. I hope that I was able to show with these examples that the Greco Arabic translation movement was more than just a translation, that there was a negotiation between cosmic visions in which sometimes the old Arabian one survived, and that there was much more than Greek sciences being processed. Moreover, that there were many more historical actors partaking in this hardly delimitable movement with their own ideas and concepts, and especially their love for learning. But also that translations are always cultural transfers. They are not a mere exchange of phonetic structures, but an embedding into a different epistemic system, into their own web of meanings. This translation process continues. In this very moment, as you are listening and thinking about these concepts, it is reenacted. So thank you for participating in this ongoing translation project.
Thank you very much. Would it be possible, even if you have to generalize a bit, to tell us about who were the intended audience for these translations? Were they there for a sort of monastic culture like in Western Europe, or more secular readership?
So it really depends on which translation we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But I think, especially the translations preceding the narrow version of the Arabic translation movement took place in a monastic context, for sure. And I think what is particular, what is special about this Arabic translation movement, that now it became more secular, and there were people who commissioned these translations because they were interested in astronomy, in mathematics, in medicine. And I think the same is true for Europe. It's because there were so many schools, it's really hard to generalize the idea or the impetus.
All right, thank you very much.